we live in a world that is all about communication. We have technologies. It's so important in our value system that communication and information have become the most important commodities in our world. But actually, with all the communication that we do, we seem to spend less and less time actually listening to one another. And it's easy to suggest that listening might be one of the most important and underused skills of our time. It isn't anything new. Listening has always been a challenge. The Greek philosopher Diogenes said, the reason why we have 2 ears and only one mouth is so that we might listen more and talk less. So matters of listening have always been important issues in communication. And it seems as if it's a well-known problem that we fail to listen. Marcus Aurelius himself tells us, learn to not automatically disregard what someone has to say, but rather attempt to enter into the mind of the speaker. It's wise advice. It goes beyond listening itself and says why. Basically, in order to really understand what is being thought about, what is being strategized, what is being suggested, you have to listen. And listen is more than just hear. Listening, of course, does more than that. Listening helps us build our relationships. It helps solve problems. It ensures that we really understand each other and meet our minds to be able to resolve conflicts or be accurate about what needs to be done at work. Effective listening means fewer errors, less wasted time. It means resourcefulness, whether at work or at home or whatever the case may be. Listening builds our relationships, it builds our friendships, it builds our careers. And yet, the opposite, being unheard, results in feelings of disconnection, loneliness, isolation. I mean, the need to be heard and the need to be understood is a basic need. We have basic needs like food, but we really need to be seen and need to be heard. And as much as all of us need it, most of us actually lack that skill. Most of us are not actually listening, even when it seems that we are. Studies show that the average person only remembers 50% of what they've heard immediately after they've heard it. And within 3 days, they actually only remember 10% of what they've heard. And even if they appear to remember more than that, they really are supposing, guessing, and drawing conclusions of their own, which aren't quite the same as, of course, what they heard. It's probably because we think that listening is a passive skill. All we need to do is sit there and, we'll pick up everything that's being said. But the truth is, we might pick up what's being said, but we don't really grasp the meaning behind it. When we're listening in a passive way, we really are listening to our own inner dialogue rather than what someone is actually saying. So whether we're just daydreaming because we're not really paying attention, or more commonly, we've got certain preconceived ideas about what they're saying. So we are processing our own ideas in response to theirs, not really listening to theirs very much in the process. We might be formulating our argument in return. We might be structuring what we're saying to match and argue against or whatever, present our own point of view to what they're saying. But all of that means we're not really listening to what they're actually saying. So we could have these preconceived biases. But sometimes it's even more simple than that. And we've just got our own stuff going on in our heads, our own dialogue. We've got that little voice that goes on in the head all the time. And that sometimes gets in the way. They're talking about the thing. You're not even sitting there planning your strategy. You're thinking about chores that you have to do, or fantasizing about something, or letting your mind run. Listening is an art. To listen, we need to be patient. We need to be receptive. We need to be open-minded, and we need to be non-judgmental. We need to basically guard against the things which cause us to kind of fill in the gaps for ourselves. So we need to really test ourselves. And one of the ways to approach it is, while listening, to have the question in your mind, what is the other person trying to express? It should be our goal when we enter a conversation to understand what the other person wants to tell you. In fact, something that Marcus Aurelius also tells us, that we should have the goal to understand. When we understand, when we listen with the intention to understand, then we hear the person and they feel heard and seen. So it's then an emotional connection that develops. When we listen to what's being said and we're clearly listening, there's a bond that happens between ourselves and who's ever speaking. And the bond is connection, understanding. You understand me. It doesn't mean you agree with me, and it doesn't even have to mean you agree with me. It easily goes to presumption of disagreement when we're not creating those bonds as we listen. So my intention is to understand them, not to argue against them. So we can start off by, my intention is to understand, and secondly, I won't say anything. Let me be the person who listens, not who fires back every time. So let me try not answer back. Let me try not fire back. Means stop listening to the words and looking for clever responses, or blocking responses, or responses that might show that you basically are not really hearing what they are saying. When you listen, you decide, I'm only going to say something if it improves the conversation. It develops your empathy and your empathic listening skills, but mostly it develops your conversation skills, your communication skills, your observation skills. Because if you focused on the speaker and where the information is coming from, you're focused on receiving information. Not only from that, your other observation skills improve because you're focusing on receptiveness instead of spitting out your opinion the whole time and defending yourself, which seems to be what we always want to do. We're feeling threatened. Someone having a conversation does not automatically mean they're disagreeing with you. So we need to take the neutral, open approach. Krishnamurti says that the art of listening is to listen without comparing to what you already know. So if you keep on comparing what you're listening to what you know, what you think about it, you basically distort what is being said. You won't really understand it because you've already got the shape of the knowledge in the old knowledge that you had. So you've got to listen to the words, their meaning, their significance. Can you listen without saying anything? Can you listen without comparing, translating, and rather just hearing what is this person trying to say? Krishnamurti says absolute listening is very difficult because we've never learned the art of listening. Listen to birds, sounds, the world around you, and pay close attention. You can even ask yourself, what is that bird trying to tell me? Probably isn't trying to tell you anything, but it's just a way to focus your attention and really asking, what am I really hearing? Don't resist, says Krishnamurti. Listen with your heart. Listen to the words, the meaning of the words, the significance behind the words, and thereby have an insight into what is being said. Insight, he says, is not that you intellectually understand or verbally comprehend what is being said, because truth is something that lies beyond the word, but it is only achieved through the art of listening. The main reason we don't listen is because we are daydreaming. We lose focus. And I mean, it's sometimes easy to do so because not everyone is a great speaker. They might be rambling on and on. They might be repeating themselves. They might not be that interesting. They might have a dull tone of voice or something like that. And even if that's not the case, they might say something which triggers your own circle of thoughts. Very common problem that we have, which is a kind of drifting off. And we need to learn to observe ourselves in listening. Remember, listening is an art of observation, not only with the eyes, with awareness, with hearing, and with self-awareness. So noticing ourselves drifting off and just bring yourself back again. Don't beat yourself up and get into an internal dialogue, because then you're not listening at all. Rather just bringing yourself back and maybe even jotting down a few notes. It's a great way to keep yourself focused, to learn to listen, to show that you care about what's being said, making a few notes, being interested, showing that you value the information because you want to hold on to it by writing it down. Another problem is we judge what the other person is saying all the time. We basically filter so much of what is said through judgment. And it's a natural thing to do. Obviously, as intelligent, aware people, we always try to understand the value of something. Is it true? The meaning of something. So it is natural to be in this constant state of judgment, but we need to be self-aware so that we notice how we use that to filter out what is saying. So one of the ways to watch ourselves, in ourselves and even in other people, is how we speak. When we use imperatives, when we're speaking back, when we're answering back, or when they are saying, when we use imperatives, you must do this, you have to do that, you should do that, there's a judgment implied in that. So when we respond in our minds or by speaking, when we say you shouldn't, but you can't, and all of those very imperative words, we know that we're making a judgment at the time, when we really should be saying, oh, really? I perhaps hadn't thought of it that way. I might come to the conclusion that I don't agree, but I can't automatically judge. So we need to listen, because the judgment is a very subtle process. We need to watch the signs, suspend the judgment, finish listening, and then think, does that make sense? Can I follow that? You know, one of the other things that we often do is we kind of have a habit of trying to predict what the other person is saying before they've actually said it. And that leads us to assume that we know that what they're going to say and we know what they're talking about, which is, of course, not true. It ends up blocking listening, because everything they say, we fitting into that, we discarding when it doesn't follow the narrative that we've now got in our minds that says, this is where you're going with that. And by assuming that's where they're going with that, kind of half the time we're just waiting for them to get there, or saying, yes, 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 but, and answering back. You know, how often do we hear a friend, whether they're complaining about something, say it's a friend who complains a lot and often complains about this particular something, but they come to you with something to discuss, and they say something which makes you think, here we go again. Or, okay, I'll just give them 5 minutes. Any of those things is we assume, we know, we fail to listen. So we need to learn to stop the inner predictor and realize that we don't need to predict and forecast what someone is going to say. They're going to say it. Let me sit, let me listen, let me be aware. And again, interrogate what they're going to say. How to really listen to someone is primarily not to concentrate on yourself. Observe yourself, but not to think about what are you going to say, what are you going to say next, what do you think about what they're saying, what's your response to what they're saying, or thinking about something completely different altogether, which, as I said, is a very common problem. So we engage with them. One of the most important ways to engage is to make eye contact. When you look directly at the person who is speaking, it's a very clear way to indicate you are paying attention. And, it's also that we expose ourselves through our eyes, and we know that. So when someone is looking into your eyes, it's almost as if they can see whether you're listening or not. That vulnerability that we feel when someone looks directly into our eyes is exactly what we need for listening, because it opens us up to the listening rather than gets us into that state where we're actually in our own minds. So eye contact is the clearest way to be present, be aware, to communicate that I am paying attention, and to actually pay attention. When you're not listening, when you're not looking at them, it really comes across that you don't care. And not only don't care about what they say, but that you don't care about them. We know that even in things like a lecture theatre, if you concentrate on the speaker, if you keep looking at their face, their eyes while they're talking, they will eventually pick up that you are someone who is listening to them. And especially if you go on to kind of step 2, show your responses. When you are listening and keeping eye contact with someone, nod, make facial expressions, smile, tilt your head. They all indicate I'm hearing, I'm thinking about what you've just said, I'm grasping the meaning of what you said, I'm processing, I don't understand what you just said. We know, in fact, that in a lecture situation, if people on the left of the room are nodding and smiling and people on the right of the room are not, the lecturer will eventually only be looking at the left of the room. Experiments have shown that. It's quite simple. And the same is true in the one-to-one situation, that if you continuously give the feedback, you create that bond that I spoke about at the beginning that is so necessary in order for us to actually understand each other. And then perhaps rather than come back with your opinion or come back with an argument, ask questions. Asking questions shows that you're engaged and engages you. It lets you get more of the information. And by asking questions and getting more of the information, of course, you are literally focusing much more on that very process of what I said at the beginning, understanding and receiving, rather than having all your own thoughts and all of those things in the way. So it literally gets you to receive more information. It also conveys that you're interested, and not only that, that you're interested in understanding more than just information. It's one thing to be in an age of information, where information is the most valuable commodity in our world, but it's not the same as actually understanding. And it is a big issue because we also find ourselves listening in the world of content production. Just produce content. It's become the biggest thing. And I need to produce more content for whatever it may be. And what often happens, the thing that I often see, for example, online are advertisements where you can buy quantities of pre-produced content. So no effort in writing your blog and coming up with memes and making little quotes and endlessly being able to post every day to Facebook or some other social media so that you can keep your profile up, get more followers, get more likes and more income and everything else that might ensue from it. And the actual understanding isn't even seemingly required in that transaction. It always completely, to me, it beggars belief. Why would someone want to buy pre-made content that they can do all cutesy things and seemingly intelligent things on their posts of whatever kind? Because surely, if you're trying to convey a message, if you're trying to influence people or whatever the case may be, you must believe that you've got something to say. But that isn't how the world necessarily works anymore. In a world where people aren't really listening, where everyone is just trying to sprout their own ideas the whole time, all that matters is that you've got something to say, that you've got content. It doesn't matter what that content actually is, or even if it originally came from you. So critical understanding, asking questions, engaging, demonstrating that you're processing and understanding and wanting to understand what the speaker is actually saying, which might also challenge people to not produce pre-made content and actually say something which is engaging and which people will listen to. So we must listen without thinking. Don't interrupt a person. Let them speak uninterrupted. If you want to be a good listener, you need to hold your thoughts, or when your thoughts come to mind, just put them to the side and let the other person say everything they need to say. It isn't always about conveying of the information. Sometimes there's other stuff going on, but they need to get their thoughts and their opinions out. When you are allowing someone to speak, the spotlight is on them. And what you would like to do in order to be a good listener is to let them feel that the spotlight is on them, that this is their chance to shine, that it's not about you. So listen without forming responses. Listen to the whole message. Don't let your mind wander. And listen without judgment. It's very important to withhold automatic negative evaluations and judgments. By being open-minded and letting someone come to the conclusion of what they have to say, then your judgment is going to be more valuable, rather than sounding like you're just trying to shoot them down with everything that you say. It doesn't have to be a competition. You're not trying to show that you know more, or that you're right and they're wrong. So you don't want to shut down, and you want to retain an open mind. And also notice the non-verbal communications. The non-verbal communication is also very important. Non-verbal communication is up to something like 75% of our communication. That is the vast majority of what's being said to you isn't actually even being said in the words. It's in the hands, it's in the eyes, it's in the tone of voice. It's in all sorts of subtleties that you, as a fellow human being, are able to read and understand and pick up. But you have to be paying attention. Your mind has to be on the speaker, not on yourself. Your listening needs to be out there, not inside our own heads. And that also lets you be more responsive to what they say. Being a good listener means noticing, are they slightly wary of you? Are they a little bit uncomfortable? Then you can respond to that as well. You can make them feel easier, open up more, communicate more with you by making them feel that. So noticing where they're coming from is paying attention to them. It helps them feel important and heard, which we know is important in trying to communicate. But most importantly, as I keep on saying, it makes the communication actually happen. So notice someone else's body language, because that's also going to improve the communication as well. And sometimes a really great way to show that you are listening is to paraphrase, is to repeat back to them what they're saying in slightly different words. That shows that you're listening. It shows that you're listening carefully, and it shows that you're processing what they're saying. So what you mean is, and you say it again a slightly different way. They feel heard, they feel affirmed, they feel understood, communication increases. Basically, it costs us nothing to do that. And the gains are potentially enormous in terms of information, the most valuable commodity in our society, after all. So if you do disagree, and if you do feel what they're saying is utterly ridiculous, it doesn't have to be said in that moment. You can think so at the end of it all. But if you want to be the open-minded listener and learner, you have to get there by hearing them, not by setting up your ideas right from the beginning. Empathy is the heart and soul of good listening. To experience empathy, you have to put yourself in the other person's place and allow yourself to feel what it is like to be that person at that moment. It's not easy. It takes energy, it takes concentration, but it is generous, it is helpful, and it facilitates communication like nothing else. Good listening is empathy. Empathy is one of the greatest human attributes, one of the most powerful ways we connect, bond, and most importantly, understand each other. Because understanding each other resolves conflict, improves growth, and communication.